The event, organised by civil society organisations and trade unions, will be held in the city. The march intends to demonstrate the rejection of xenophobic acts that have claimed the lives of at least 7 people and has left thousands displaced. The UN Secretary-General has meanwhile warned that the xenophobic violence could destroy the fabric and solidarity of South African society. His remarks came on the sidelines of a high-level thematic debate in the General Assembly. It's seeking to promote tolerance and reconciliation in the face of growing violent extremists around the world.
Violent acts like this only destroys the fabric of society and the solidarity and unity of the society. Therefore, we are against any prejudice based on ethnicity or religion. These stop hatred and division of the society.
Meanwhile, government has vowed to address all underlying issues that have the potential to spark xenophobic attacks in the future. Addressing the media around a top-level meeting on South Africa's migration policies, President Jacob Zuma said an interministerial committee has been established. It will investigate the cause of the recent attacks on foreign nationals. The committee will also advise government on how to stop them from recurring.
We've put together certain departments to work on this matter, but we yesterday established a committee that is going to take matters from now, when the violent attacks have ended, but also to say, what do we do to ensure that it will never happen again?
Police are still hunting for the killers of a Port Elizabeth teacher whose death has shocked the nation. Jade Panyatao's body was found in Uitenhage yesterday after she was abducted outside of her home. Police have confirmed a man is wanted for questioning, but denied the man is a suspect in the murder investigation. The community of Uitenhage gathered at the town's market square last night to burn candles in memory of the slain teacher. And in sports, Kaizer Chiefs are the new Absa Premiership champions. For the second time in 3 seasons, Amakosi have ascended to glory after beating Polokwane City 4-1 at the FNB Stadium last night. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Sam, over to you.
Thanks indeed. Now, United Nations Secretary-General has warned that the violent xenophobic attacks could destroy the fabric and solidarity of South African society. His remarks came on the sidelines of a high-level thematic debate in the General Assembly. It's seeking to promote tolerance and reconciliation in the face of growing violent extremism around the world.
A meeting to promote peaceful and inclusive societies. And while violent extremism was the focus, the Secretary-General quickly expressed concern about the attacks in South Africa.
Hate crimes against foreigners and communities that are poor, marginalized, and vulnerable are morally wrong and unacceptable. I'm extremely concerned about reports of xenophobia in South Africa.
From the UN spokesperson earlier condemned the attacks, while noting the actions the government had taken in response.
The African government is responding to the situation, but more needs to be done to provide adequate protection to everyone who is affected by this situation.
The President of the General Assembly also called for all manifestations of intolerance to be condemned.
UN officials are also calling for national leadership and societies at large to effectively address the drivers and underlying causes that contribute to intolerance and xenophobia, including things like injustice, inequality, a lack of the rule of law, human rights violations, and discrimination based on ethnicity, religion, or otherwise. Shervin Ricebees, SABC News, New York.
With calm being restored to townships like Alexandra after the country recently saw a spate of xenophobic attacks, it has become increasingly important to restore South Africa's sense of unity. We've seen South Africans from all walks of life take a stand against xenophobia, but how do we now build pride and restore brand South Africa? Joining us in studio to talk about this is global African brand and reputation architect Tebe Nkalafeng. Tebe, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us here in Newsroom.
Thank you so much, man.
Let's maybe start with the reaction from you, the piece with Sherwin Bryce piece. We saw the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon talking about xenophobia in South Africa, but also saying that the South African government has got it under control. From a brand reputation and brand architect perspective, how important is that, telling the rest of the world that everything is in control and that things have been restored to calm?
Well, I think that's very reassuring, because the most important thing that happens is what happened with this spate of attacks is that they send a wrong message to the world about the South Africa that many of us believe in, the South Africa that many of us fought for. So when that is being recognized, that the government of South Africa, the people of South Africa are standing up against xenophobia, that sends a good message to the rest of the world. Because if we don't send a good message to the rest of the world, we're going to be affected on three areas. We're going to be affected from tourism, which is accountable for about 10% of the country's GDP. We're going to be affected from an FDI perspective. South Africa is the number one FDI country in Africa. We're also going to be affected as a people from a citizenship perspective, because South Africans are known to be peace-loving people and people who know how to forgive and people who know how to live with other people.
Let's talk about that very interesting 3 points. And I actually want to touch on the first point, because we have now seen African countries issuing travel warnings and restrictions to their citizens coming to South Africa. Moving forward, how do we restore, and I think it's critical, yet again I'll touch on the point that the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is saying that the South African government is in control. How do we now say to the rest of Africa that in actual fact it's only a certain very small minority grouping that have these issues? It's not Africa at large. It's not South Africa at large.
Well, I think it's a multi-stakeholder responsibility. First, we have a responsibility from the media perspective as well, for the media to tell the other stories of South Africa. Because, you know, as the President rightfully made a note last week and this week as well, or rather the beginning of this week at the ANC headquarters and yesterday as well, it is only a few minority who are doing this, and the responsibility of media is to be able to tell a balanced story of South Africa. If we are consistently showing just the negative images of the few people, or the few rotten apples in the country, we are telling a wrong story of South Africa. So to reassure the rest of the continent, we have to also tell the stories, you know. So that's why it's so reassuring when I see stories of people in Alexandra and other places. They said, you know, in the rest of Alexandra, we are quite peaceful and things are happening as normal and as usual. So that's what we need to do. We need to do that. And second, we also need to demonstrate to these continents, to these countries, that we are decisively dealing with those culprits. We are prosecuting them and we are jailing them, and we are doing it in a way that sends a message that this is not going to be tolerated in South Africa. I think the most important thing that we need to do as a country is not to be so much worried about taking out ads and doing speeches, but it's about showing actively that we're a very accommodating country.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I want to ask you, if you were an architect and you had to draw this blueprint, and you are a brand architect, but if you had to give you a sheet and say, draw this for us, and I like the idea that you're saying that actions are the starting point and less talking. But in that actions, language is critical. We need to have the right language in order to promote that action.
We need to have the right language, and that language starts from what South Africa, the foundations of this new South Africa in 1994. I think it's quite instructive to remember that this country was built on reconciliation. This country was built on accommodating the diverse cultures, not just of South Africa, but also this country was built on the gratitude and the generosity of the other African countries, and that's how we got to be who we are. So as a country, what we need to do is, from a messaging perspective, perspective, we need to coordinate the message and ensure that whether it's government speaking, whether it's citizens speaking, whether it's corporate speaking, we are all speaking from the same hymn. And that hymn is within us, that hymn is in our constitution. And that hymn is a singular story, that South Africa is a welcoming country. South Africa is a country that inspires new ways on how to deal with such conflicts. I think just as we've shown that we can overcome apartheid, for example, this is another opportunity for us as South Africans to demonstrate to the rest of our fellow African brothers and sisters and to the rest of the world that we can reimagine ourselves and we can recover from this situation.
As a reputation expert, how do we engage countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Zimbabwe, Malawi? How do we, those countries have been, Nigeria, we've seen the consulate close. We've seen reaction from Ghana. We've seen Malawi calling back their citizens. Zimbabwe taking the citizens back, those that are willing to go back. How do we engage those countries going forward and saying, you know what, it's business usual? It was an isolated incident. Yes, we had issues in 2008. We dealt with those. We're now dealing with these issues now in 2015. What is the starting point of that conversation? How do we get those people around the table?
Well, the starting point is to recognize that in South Africa we may have a xenophobic attack now. In Nigeria we may have Boko Haram. In Kenya we may have Al-Shabaab. Is to recognize that all these incidents, they affect the broader African brand. And part of being an African country is we need to engage those governments. And I think our government is doing just that, is engaging with the various governments of these countries through the relevant and the right channels, the embassies and all those and the presidents. And they are talking together, and that's what they do. And that's what they should do, is they need to reassure them from that from a policy perspective, we are going to look at our policies to refine them and to sharpen them to ensure that our policies and our systems in government are such that we are able to respond to this and to prevent this into the future. And then from the other end is that as citizens of South Africa, we also have a responsibility because the brand of South Africa rests among the 55 or so million of South Africans, and there are also those other fellow Africans who live in South Africa. They're also part of telling the African brands. That's why when somebody told me the other day and said to me, I've got relatives overseas, they want to come here and they're asking me if it's safe. I said, your job is to tell them it is a safe country because this is a great African country.
We're going to leave it there. Tebe Ngalafeng, thank you very much for joining us. He is a global African brand and reputation architect, sharing his insights into how we move forward and how we engage with our fellow brothers and sisters on the African continent. Now, police have once again been out in full force in Johannesburg. This time around, they raided a hostel in Alexandra Township last night. It follows a spate of attacks directed at foreigners.
Scores of police together with the army raided this hostel in Alexandra as authorities go all out to halt the recent attacks on foreigners.
Open up!
Even bringing in heavy guns. The decision to rope in the defense has sparked criticism, and the previous raid in downtown Johannesburg sparked bitterness among hostel dwellers. But here, some residents welcomed the search.
Police are doing their job. They are supposed to search.
This is the second night police have raided hostels around Johannesburg, and they say more operations like this are to follow.
A few items, including dagga, were confiscated, but the night didn't end there. Police also conducted stop and searches into the early hours of the morning. Sibongile Mkanimbolweni, SABC News, Alexandra.
Let's take a look at your tweets. Please remember to send us your views on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Okay, it comes from Prince Peter, who says, at SABC Newsroom, thanks to the police for the quick response. We also have another one from Gugu Ndimo, who says, at SABC Newsroom, let's also commend the work done by the at SA Police Service, given the circumstances and the volatility at #xenophobic attacks. And I think that when Gugu comes in reaction to the work the police have been doing on the ground. Bareng the Duke says, military presence is needed, but not harass people who did no wrong. Not all hostel dwellers are responsible for the attacks. Barang is commenting on the raids done by police from Bootlet. It says, these raids, so do they only target hostel dwellers? I have an opinion about the violations, but is it all right? That's what I think that's what she's asking. That is some of your tweets today. Tweet of the day comes from Jay Naidu, who says hashtag xenophobia reflects our failure to educate our children in our homes, schools and communities about human values, solidarity and compassion. And I'm not sure if that's Jay Naidu, the politician who used to be the minister without portfolio. Okay, let's now take a look at the front pages from around the globe, starting in Australia. The Australian reports that floods continue to destroy the homes of many people there. Last night in Dungog, in the pitch-black water rose rushing into lounge rooms and bedrooms with terrifying speed, leaving many homeless. Then moving to Ireland, in the Irish News, it says a bomb blast used to attack police in North Belfast is suspected to have been dropped from a 16-story tower block. This happened after police were responding to a break in a flat in the New Lodge area. And lastly, moving to the USA, in the Miami Herald, the Vatican announced that Pope Francis will visit Cuba before arriving in the United States in the last week of September, a trip that will come months after he helped negotiate a diplomatic relationship between the two countries. Let's take a look at what's happening around the country today. We start in Pretoria, where Water and Sanitation Minister Nomula Mokunyane will address Shoshanguve residents on the recent xenophobic attacks and condemn violent attacks on foreign nationals in the country. Then in Polokwane, the Minister of Agriculture and Forestry and Fisheries, Senzeni Zokwana, is expected to meet with farmers in the Bembe area to discuss support challenges they are facing. And then in Swaziland, suspects including former Justice Minister, 2 High Court judges and a High Court registrar are expected to appear in the Mbabane court. They are facing charges of fraud and misuse of power. 10 years ago this week, the first ever video was uploaded to YouTube. The video, entitled Me at the Zoo, featured the site co-founder Jawed Karim standing in front of an elephant pen at the San Diego Zoo. Although the video is capturing a very simple moment, it has led to the platform's revolution that followed. Today, YouTube has more than 1 billion users and some 300 hours of video gets uploaded every minute. Can you imagine? Take a look at this. Okay, we showed you the clip of that very first clip on YouTube nearly 10 years ago. Can you imagine over 1 billion users? We're on our way to an ad break. You don't go anywhere.
Oh, hi. Just brushing up on my party. We are going to make it number 12. Official. Let me teach you a quick word. Yeah. Quite a star. A woman who has mastered the art of dancing in high heels. Yeah. It's up and flick. Up and flick.
Help make Party South Africa's 12th official language. Sign the petition today.
Okay. Selfie?
No.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom. The Eastern Cape Province has also embarked on a week-long anti-xenophobia campaign, spreading the message of peaceful coexistence between its residents and multitudes of foreign nationals scattered throughout this province. Today, hundreds of students, academics and lecturers from the Nelson Mandela University in Port Elizabeth will wear black, while some will put on their academic gowns as they embark on a march against xenophobic treatment of foreign nationals in the country. To tell us more about this, we are joined by our assignment editor in the Eastern Cape, Tammy Dixon. Tammy, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us here on Newsroom. Let's start with an update, a horrific story involving that teacher in the Eastern Cape.
Well, good morning, Sam, and thank you very much for having us. Indeed, it's a heart-wrenching story of the abduction and murder of a young teacher, 28 years. She was abducted on Tuesday morning as she was making her way to school, and what followed thereafter was a painful tragedy where the police had to be involved, putting up a lot of resources, including police officials on foot, on horses, and even an amount of 150,000 rand was put up as a reward to assist in finding Jade. Unfortunately, the whole day, Tuesday, they couldn't find her. Her body was then found the following day, which is yesterday, with gun wounds, which suggested that she was murdered. And the police are still struggling to find who could have been behind this murder, and they're still looking for suspects. I do know that even the newspapers this morning, this side, are actually running the story of this very beautiful teacher who was suddenly murdered in such a very gruesome manner in Newtonek. And they're still looking for suspects, and nobody has been found. There are leads that they are following, but at this point, nobody has been arrested in connection with this. What then happened was that the community where she was staying in Kapeka suburb, they came together last night and in a show of support really for what has really shocked that suburb, trying to assist in finding the culprits. And they had some prayers, there were candlelights, sessions that were held last night. Even in Newtonek, where she was a teacher, people came together, including young children where she was a teacher. They came together really trying to pay tribute to her and trying to find reasons and the culprits who could have been behind this. Sam?
Tommy, now there are some other developments in your neck of the woods as well. There's a march on the cards today from the Nelson Mandela University in Port Elizabeth, and we'll see many academics, people getting involved in this march, saying no to xenophobia. Just share some of your insights in terms of what's expected today, and ultimately, I think what the strong message will be from those taking part in that march, Tommy.
Well, this is part of the provincial anti-xenophobia campaign, which really is throughout the province. From the mountains of the Transkei and the rural areas, the message is the same. It's the anti-xenophobia message to the central part of our province, where our capital is in Bisho and in the areas of East London, coming to Port Elizabeth where I am. There are campaigns all around really trying to encourage people to take this message of peaceful coexistence with our foreign nationals, as you can see in the video behind me. That's a campaign led by Premier of our province, Phumulo Moswale. She visited schools, in the province, in East London. That's a school where there are some of the students, they are coming from Nigeria, from Zimbabwe, teachers are from Ghana and India. So it's a model school where really this peaceful coexistence of different nationalities is being encouraged. The message is the same. They also visited some foreign shops, or rather shops that are owned by foreign nationals, really to encourage them to say the government is trying by all means to ensure that they are protected in the country, and they should therefore not be afraid. They will be provided with protection. And so the march that we're going to see today at the Nelson Mandela University is part of all of these campaigns. And the message really is that the university wants to assure the very many students who are coming from the rest of the continent, as you know, that the university has about 27,000 students, and the majority of those students come from different countries of the world, including the African continent. And therefore, they want to say to them that they are welcome in South Africa, their contribution is welcome, and they shouldn't therefore feel that they are alienated in one way or the other, and they shouldn't feel that they are under threat or under siege. The university will continue to provide space for them to develop because they know that once they develop, they will not only contribute in South Africa, but they will contribute throughout the entire continent to ensure that the issue of migration at the end is being addressed, because part of the problem here is that people are running away from elsewhere in the continent, attracted by probably better opportunities in South Africa. But so what they need to do, therefore, is to ensure that even where they come from, issues of economic development are being addressed, issues of institutional capacity are being addressed. And so by growing this population of students at this university will assist, therefore, to have them going back to their countries and contribute in building their own institutions there and their own economic development, so that we begin to see a reduction in terms of people crossing the borders, coming to South Africa.
Tom, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. Our assignment editor in the Easter game, Tammy Diction, sharing insights into the Nelson Mandela University march that will be starting there. Hundreds of students, academics and lecturers from the university is set to march and speak strongly against the xenophobic action that's been happening in that part of the country. Also an update on the latest related to the school teacher that went missing and then was later found dead. Okay, let's just take a look at your tweets. Please remember to send us your views on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Okay, and it comes from Tasso Nikas, who says, any person that kills another without remorse or justification in cold blood should not be surprised when facing the same fate. And that is in relation to what's been happening in the Eastern Cape to that teacher. It goes by the hashtag Jade. Rest in peace, Jade Panyatau, senseless killing of an innocent. I am having a really hard time being politically correct. That comes from Jason in reaction to that murder that's currently being investigated. Stuart Woodham says, so sad to hear that Jade found murdered, praying for the family and friends at hashtag justice, hashtag South Africa. And then coming from Crap Bag, it's devastated about the loss of Jade. I simply have no words. I hope the men responsible are brought to serious justice. And that's hashtag rest in peace, Jade. Okay, that's your tweets. Now, today's picture of the day comes from Victoria Craw, caption, what happens when it floods in Australia? And that was part of our news this morning. Take a look at that crazy picture. Now let's take a look at what's happening on our Newsroom Facebook page. Today, Arts and Culture Minister Nadim Tetwa says South Africans will soon have theme parks for statues. The idea of the theme parks is part of a 20-point plan by the Department of Arts and Culture after consultation with civil society. Then Nigerian forces backed by warplanes invaded Islamist group Boko Haram's last known stronghold in the Sambisa forest yesterday in an effort to finally defeat their 6-year-old insurgency. And the president of the African Union Commission, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, says she hopes there will be no backlash across the African continent following the xenophobic attacks in South Africa. Dlamini-Zuma spoke at a meeting between the commissioners of the African Union and the European Union in Brussels. You can find all of these stories and more on our Newsroom Facebook page or visit our SABC website at www.sabc.co.za/news. Time for us to take a break here in Newsroom. You don't go anywhere.
Players. So, what do you call someone who does their bit to ensure the future's gonna be cool? Voter. Get it? No, dudes. Not voter, kabouter. I'm talking voter. You know, like make an X. Ish, tough crowd.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's just have a look at the stories making headlines today. It's not clear if any arrests were made during last night's raid at the Kwamadala hostel in Alexandra. Police accompanied by soldiers were once again out in full force in Johannesburg. The raid in Alexandra follows a similar one that took place in Jeffreystown earlier this week. This follows a spate of attacks directed at foreigners in the different areas. Gauteng's Premier and Johannesburg's Mayor are expected to join an anti-xenophobic march today. The event, organised by civil society organisations and trade unions, will be held in the city. The march intends to demonstrate the rejection of xenophobic acts that have claimed the lives of at least 7 people and has left thousands displaced. And police are still hunting for the killers of a Port Elizabeth teacher whose death has shocked the nation. Jade Panayoti's body was found in Uitenhage after she was abducted outside of her home. Police have confirmed a man is wanted for questioning, but deny the man is a suspect in the murder investigation. Remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us and send your tweets to @SABC Newsroom. Sam, back to you.
Thanks, Anine. Now, the Beitbridge border post between South Africa and Zimbabwe has been extremely busy as some foreign nationals, mainly Zimbabwe nationals, are heading back home. At least 4 buses believed to be transporting Zimbabwe nationals who were displaced in Durban have passed through Gauteng. Some of the more than 400 Zimbabweans who were repatriated to their country following the spate of xenophobic attacks in South Africa are said to be severely traumatized and needed special counselling, according to Zimbabwe's Ministry of Health. For the latest, we go to the SABC correspondent in Zimbabwe, Shingai Nyoka. Shingai, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. Give us the latest situation concerning these Zimbabweans going home.
Good morning to you. As you mentioned, we're at the Beitbridge border post at the camp, the special camp that's been set up by government officials as well as the International Organization on Migration, which is about 5 kilometers away from the border post. There are plenty of tents here, plastic tents and tarpaulin tents that have been set up to receive the evacuees and the refugees as they arrive. And the first batch arrived the day before yesterday. They were vetted and put into buses and transported to their various homes. As we speak, we understand that there's another bus that's on its way. At this stage, we're not sure when it'll arrive. There are conflicting reports about whether it will be here this morning, but that particular busload, we understand those particular busloads have about 300 Zimbabweans. So this effectively is the second batch of nationals who are expected to arrive today.
Shingai, give us a sense of the conversation on the ground in Zimbabwe in reaction to the story of Zimbabweans returning back home. We've seen Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe strongly condemning these xenophobic attacks happening here in South Africa. What's the reaction been on the ground?
Well, there is a similar sense of outrage amongst Zimbabweans. The conversation generally is one that's taking place around the continent of the assistance that countries like Zimbabwe and the frontline states in Southern Africa, which gave assistance to South African refugees in their hour of need in the 1980s. We have stories that have been told by people who knew President Jacob Zuma very well when he used to come to Zimbabwe and live in a suburb just outside the CBD. And really there is a sense of disbelief about why this is happening. President Mugabe himself has said that that Africans should be treated with dignity, especially on the home continent, and that whatever issues need to be resolved, they can be resolved by sitting around a table rather than slaughtering each other as we've seen.
Give me a sense of the situation that Zimbabweans going back will be facing. Is it back to square one for them? Because a lot of them left because of the economic hardships in the first place.
That's precisely the fear that a lot of people have, is that they're running away from one particular problem, but running straight into another. And the reasons that they left Zimbabwe, which is the state of the economy, they left in search of livelihoods and to economically better their lives. But they come back to a situation in some cases which is worse than the one that they left. You'll know that about 5,000 companies have closed over the last 3 years. Tens of thousands of people are out on the street, and employment is still very high. So at this stage, they might be running away from the frying pan, but really in terms of the lives that they have ahead of them, it's going to be very difficult for them to try to rebuild their lives given the high unemployment rate and the very few business opportunities that exist. And it might take a while for them to exist, to adjust. But really the sense that a lot of people have here is that they might seek opportunities elsewhere in other countries. Botswana, for example, and Zambia is also up and coming. So really we wait to see whether these very same people will stick around or whether they'll try to find opportunities elsewhere.
Singai Nyoka, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. SABC correspondent from Zimbabwe, sharing some insights as Zimbabweans who've left South Africa in the wave of the xenophobic attacks return back home. Now, a superstorm has claimed the lives of 3 people, washing away a number of houses and cutting off electricity for over 200,000 homes in the east coast of Australia. Yesterday, the Meteorological Agency warned of yet another storm developing off the coast, north of Sydney, with wind speeds of up to 100 kilometers per hour. In studio with me is well-known face of SABC weather to talk about the damages, Paul Manare. He's a weather expert and a bit of a... I always call you a science geek when we're doing the other show. It's a bit of a science geek. Paul, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, sir.
Before we talk about damages and kind of the issues there, for a lot of us, we don't know. How does a superstorm become a superstorm?
Okay, well... supercell, they differ from sort of tropical cyclones and hurricanes and so on. They're all from the same family and they all basically develop the same way. If you go into the weather system just now, so I can show you a couple of these pictures, I hope they come up quickly. Basically, you get this super updraft and at the same time also a downdraft. It's like just strong winds that are going really up at the, unimaginable speeds, and they're also quite strong. And then with the supercell, the one that's taking place in Australia, is that there's also these low-level winds that are also coming in. There it is, yeah, this is what I wanted to show you. So these converging low-level winds, they're basically fueling up the storm. So you can see the red arrows there in that counterclockwise sort of movement is the updraft that I'm talking about, yeah. And it's moving on a vertical axis, basically it's just going up or, coming down. So it begins by these mid-level mesocyclone. It becomes a mesocyclone once these converging low-level winds come through, and they just keep on fueling the storm. Nobody really knows why it happens like that or where they come from, because wind is always blowing all over the place. But when it blows around the vertical axis, and then you get these lower winds keeping on fueling the storm, like putting sort of petrol to fire, yeah, and it keeps on blowing strong and strong and strong until it becomes a mesocyclone, and it becomes a supercell, and it develops these super humongous cumulonimbus clouds. That's basically illustration of these clouds, and they become quite big and strong and very, very unstable, and they look horrific like this. Zamani was telling me they look quite beautiful, but they're very disastrous as well at the same time.
From a layman's perspective.
Yeah. At the same time, they can become really, really disastrous, and you can see at the bottom there, you see how small the tornado looks. Right at the bottom.
And it takes all of that.
Yeah, and it takes all of that to develop, and they blow away houses, they take out trees, palm trees are usually flattened.
Let's talk about that very quickly, because we've seen damages in the Australian floods. We've talked of nearly 200,000 homes without electricity.
Yeah.
What kind of, when we look at the costs related to these kind of storms, the amount of damage related to storms, some visuals coming through now. What are we talking about here, Paul?
Yeah, you see, look at this. We've spoken about these a lot of times, me with other guys, in terms of, the damage it caused. Aside from toppling down trees and power lines, it's actually, the monetary cost that's also quite big. I'm not discrediting the human life lost there,
for sure.
But, in terms of insurance claims. The insurance agency in Australia speculates that over 7,500 claims will be put in after all of this, and that could be cost of over 100 million US or even Australian dollars. And that's actually a lot of money if you think about it. Trains being derailed, if you think about bridges being broken, and also the waves that are coming in towards the shore could be destroying boats, people's cruise liners. Yeah, exactly. This is exactly what happened. Some of the boats were actually found, kilometers away from the shore because of these supercells.
I know we harp about climate change, and it's a question and a conversation that always comes up when we're talking about this level of destruction. But where are we in terms of the conversation when we're talking about climate change? And I know that there's a concerted effort from countries around the world at political level, at scientific level, to address climate change.
Yeah, the one mistake a lot of people make is that they assume whenever there's a storm like this, sandstorm, whether tsunami, earthquake, whatever it is that's environmentally or that's a natural cause, people tend to think climate change because the conversation has been driven so much into people's faces. I mean, I know I do it. I talk to people about climate change quite a lot. But yes, these storms, in terms of occurrence, yes, it's quite related to climate change, and it's also in terms of severity. But, they are natural storms. They happen when the conditions are right, just like tropical cyclones and tornadoes. If the conditions are there, they would happen. The only effect that climate change is playing in this is the severity, in that you can get one storm that's quite devastating. If you think of the Haiyan typhoon about 2 years ago, a year ago, the intensity of it is fueled by the effects that we are putting on the environment, that we as humans, our climate change impact, or rather our impacts that we sort of inducing or accelerating this climate change process. It's leading to storms like this happening at much larger scales, and they come with winds of over 135 kilometers an hour. I don't know about you, Sam, but if you're standing against those winds, you will not come first.
I think my dreads won't stand it.
Yeah, so that's where climate change is, and that's its impact on these storms.
We've seen some other activity around the country. We've seen the Calbuco volcano in southern Chile has erupted. 1,500 people have been evacuated in that part of the world. I mean, it's more than 4 decades it was laying dormant. There's some visuals now. And all of a sudden, it's this plumes of smoke being sent up into the sky.
Yeah, remember, the thing with volcanic activity is that, although it's lying there underneath...
It's beautiful.
Again, beauty versus the destruction.
I know, it just looks beautiful.
It's the same reason why most hurricanes or storms are named after, female names. Women are beautiful and storms are beautiful, but quite destructive. But let's not go there.
I'm not going to
Let's not entertain that one. Volcanic activity, yes, they lie underneath, the Earth's surface, and we might be thinking that these are dormant, 100 years, nothing has been happening. But remember, the crust or the Earth's surface is constantly, moving, and it's also being eroded away. Weathering takes place, so the structure becomes quite weak underneath. So you see, because it's heat, there's lots of pressure, and it wants an escape route. It wants a point, the weakest point out of the Earth to be free. So once it reaches that sort of weak point, because of the erosion that has taken place or the weathering that has taken place, the rocks is now brittle and it's weak. And then the volcano manages to push through. It could be 1,000 years, it could be 100 years, it could be a week. That's exactly what happened here. It's been lying there, brewing underneath for about tens of, decades actually. Yeah, and then it actually found that weak spot.
What's the, maybe not a likely scenario, but what is the scenario now? We've seen the plumes of smoke. People have been evacuated. Are we expecting the doom and gloom of a full eruption?
Yes. Sadly, that's not as predictable as weather. We can monitor weather systems and weather patterns, but this also depends on the strength or the heat and the pressure that's underneath. So those can be tracked, but not as accurately as what you do with weather systems. But what we must look out for now is that with the volcanic activity, the amount of CO2 that's now being released in the atmosphere, which is what's also leading to climate change. So if you remember, a lot of these volcanic activities back then was what led to the Earth being much warmer. So that's what could happen. But this one was a little bit weaker than we expected or what I expected. So I don't expect, Pompeii and the absolute fireworks where everything just goes all out. But I would like to urge people to be very careful and just keep your eyes out and watch out for that.
We're nearly towards the end of this interview, but very quickly wrap the weather up for us here back home. It's getting chillier, it's colder. I'm having to find those warm jackets.
Yeah, well, you know, there's an official day when winter really starts, the winter solstice, and for us it's 21st of June. Yeah, here in the southern hemisphere. You know, that includes Southern Africa, Australia, and South America, and so forth. Everything below the equator. So winter hasn't officially started, but you know, because of the climatic conditions now, you know, and also if you look at the watch around 6 o'clock, I tried jogging last night at about 6:20. It was already dark, and usually in summer it's quite bright up until about 7, maybe 10 past 7-ish. So yes, winter is kicking in. Temperatures are starting to drop. A couple of cold fronts have already hit us, and we're expecting more in the next couple of months. So yeah, it's pretty getting cooler. So get your blankets ready. Prepare for the cold weather. Hot chocolate, you know, teddy bears, hot water bottles, whatever. Just try to use as little electricity as possible so that, you know, we can conserve and the demand is not as high. And then many other strategies. Maybe we can talk about that next week or in the next couple of weeks. Strategies on keeping warm without using electricity.
And we're not talking about piling people on top of you.
That I will also not entertain. That's all you.
Let's leave that. Okay, weather guy Paul Manare talking to us about superstorms and how these tropical storms that we as laymen classify as beautiful, and just some of the issues that's been happening around the world, especially in places like Chile and Australia. Now, let's have a look at what people are saying on Twitter. Please remember to send us your views on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Here on the Bright Eye, pics from Sydney. That's some of the storm issues that Paul was talking about. This is Sydney after the storm, looks relatively calm. Some more pictures out of Sydney. This is all related to the storm that's seen nearly 200,000 homes without electricity. That is one brave human being. More than rain in 24 hours than seen in the same period for a century, according to Jake Cornwall. And some destruction cleanup begins after the storm in Australia. You can see that it's just, but that comes from Steffi. And the one from Sandcastles, anyone, you can see just some of the pictures that's coming from Australia. And then I think we've got one more coming up. Some stunning pictures out of Australia, and also showing, of course, the devastation in the wake of that storm. We'll keep you updated here on Channel 404. You're watching Newsroom. It's broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. We also stream live on YouTube at that time, with the show available on demand on your YouTube channel. We love to interact and enjoy your contributions and your opinions immensely. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning. We'll see you tomorrow. Ciao.
Information-hungry viewers stay with SABC News, as issues on the West are different from issues on the East or here in Johannesburg. So it is not surprising that people who follow the news know that there are two things for sure: that anything can happen, and SABC News will tell you when it does. Because we keep the nation fully informed. We are SABC News.
Morning is when different people take different directions to different places for different reasons to do different things.